In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to paint a Space Marine Chaplain for your games of Warhammer 40,000. Throughout this tutorial, you'll learn how to paint that black armour and how to highlight it, as well as creating texture and all the different materials, along with any of the details you're going to need to know how to paint. And so you can follow along, this is an easy to follow step-by-step guide, showing you all the steps and techniques you'll need, so by the end of this tutorial, you'll have the confidence and knowledge to get your own Space Marine Chaplain painted. And if you stick around until the end, I'll even show you how we can paint and add interest to those giant purity seals. Welcome to TableTopReady, my name's Michael, and I want to show you in this tutorial how we can paint a Space Marine Chaplain and see how we can approach painting this cool looking leather coat he's got. All of the paints and brushes I use throughout this tutorial will be shown on the screen as I use them, and they'll also be listed in the description along with any hobby equipment I think you'll find useful, with affiliate links to where you can buy them. And before we get started, I want to say a massive thank you to all the amazing people who've made this tutorial possible. It really means a lot. As well, if you enjoy my content here on TableTopReady, then let me know by clicking that like button or leaving me a comment. I love reading them and hearing about your own hobby. Chaplains are the spiritual leaders of the Space Marines, instilling them with the beliefs and the values of their chapter, so you're going to need to know how to paint one, and I've been eager to paint one myself for the channel. To help make our chaplain easier to paint, I've chosen to build it in sub-assemblies. This is going to let us get into those places that would normally be difficult to get to if we had fully assembled it. I've also undercoated the chaplain with Macragge blue spray, because this is what I had for undercoating my Ultramarines, but you can use whatever undercoat spray you have, the steps are still the same. If you need help getting your miniatures ready for painting, I do have a dedicated video on the channel showing you how. Also, throughout this tutorial I'll be showing you all the techniques and steps that you'll need to get your chaplain painted, and to make it easier to follow along with, I've split the tutorial up into different chapters. And now that we have our chaplain built and undercoated, we're now ready to get started. In this first part of the tutorial, I want to start with the very basics of applying paint to our miniatures. This is often overlooked, but it's really important to create a good foundation for all the other techniques we're going to be using later. The best place to start when painting our miniatures is to get all your base colours painted first. This lets us spend time choosing what colours we want, and painting becomes less overwhelming as we've created a great starting point to work from. Let's start by painting the armour of our chaplain, and for this we want to use a Baden black. And so we achieve best results, we always want to make sure to thin our paint, and I find an equal amount of water does the trick. As well, I like to remove excess paint from the brush on some paper towel first, which helps give us more control over how much paint is deposited. And when we're painting, we want to keep our brush moving and avoid going over any area we've already painted, to prevent creating any unwanted texture whilst the paint is still drying. Then once you're done, because we thinned our paint, it won't have covered so well, so we'll need to paint another layer using the same process. Painting in multiple layers like this means we can get a strong base colour without losing any details. We just need to make sure each layer has fully dried first before applying another one. It's really important that we build up to a solid base colour first, because any shading and highlighting we do after this will contrast better and make more of an impact. The next area we're going to be painting is the skull and ribs of our chaplain, and for these details we're going to use Morghast bone. Let's also use our Morghast bone to paint the inside of his leather cloak. For his purity seals and any scroll decoration, let's use Sandry Dust, which is a different tone to our other cream coloured details, so they stand out from each other. When you're done with those areas, we can use some Mephiston Red to paint his gun casing, book and his Crozius handle. White decoration and trinkets can be painted using Corax White. Now we need to paint that leather coat using Rhinox Hide, and then any belts and pouches with Mournfang Brown. Honestly, getting all of our base colours painted first is a great place to start, especially for any new painters and beginners. This is going to let us practice the basics and give us experience with our brush. Finally, we want to get all of our metallic colours done, starting with any silver details using Einhand steel. For all the gold details that we need to paint, we can use Retributor armour for our base colour. And although we should try our best to be as neat as possible whilst painting, it's okay if we're not, because if you're like me then you're going to be messy and make a few mistakes. Don't worry though, because we can always go back and neaten things up as we go along, or just wait until we've done all of our other base colours. We've now gotten all of our other base colours painted, making sure we've also tidied up any messy areas and mistakes. And I now want to talk about how we can start creating texture painting the leather coat. The colour we're using is dried bark, and we can use a stippling technique to apply this so we can get that rough and worn look to the leather. The paint is still thinned in the same way whilst stippling, and we can take our time creating this texture on those raised areas of the coat. If you feel you've overdone it, or you just want to make it look better, we can stipple some rhinox hide where we think we need it. And when you're happy with how it looks, we can go even lighter using storm vermin fur. Now we're done with our main colours, we can move on to the next section and see how we can bring out all of our details, creating definition. Even though we have all of our base colours painted, our chaplain is looking pretty flat. So let's see how we can create definition and bring out the details of our chaplain. Let's first work on bringing out some of our finer details using a wash with Nuln Oil. And this is going to be used on the book, Crozius handle and any belts and pouches. When doing a wash, we want to use enough to cover our areas comfortably, so we don't get too much pooling in areas we don't want it to. If you do see this happening, then we can remove excess shade we don't want using our brush. And once the shade is dried, you'll see how it's helped to bring out all of those details. Another way to bring out the details and make them stand out more is to do a recess shade. We're using this technique first on our bone details using XV88, and we want to apply our paint directly into any recessed areas and around details. Let's continue with another recess shade on our gun casing using Galvorback Red. And the reason we're doing a recess shade is because it's a more controlled way of creating definition than an all over wash. This means our base colours aren't affected and stay bright and vibrant. The white details can get a recess shade using Fenrisian Grey. There's really no one way to create definition on our miniatures, so it's always worth spending some time thinking about the different techniques and methods that we can use, depending on the different areas and features that we're working with. Before we move on, we need to create definition on our metallic areas, so let's first use Nuln Oil again for the silver details, and then Reikland Flesh Shade for our gold details. We're now done creating our definition, and we can move on and talk about highlighting, so we can better see all of those edges and raised details. I now want to go through the process of highlighting your miniatures and the different stages of highlights we can do. The idea behind highlighting is to bring out any edges, areas and raised details to draw our attention to them and to make them stand out more. The first way to bring out our details is to layer our paint up to a lighter colour. Starting with our skull and ribs, we're using Ushabti bone, and we're painting the raised details, leaving the definition we already created still showing. On our gold details, you'll see that our shade has dulled the colour, so let's use Liberated Gold on these areas next to make them more vibrant again. The other way of highlighting our miniatures, and the one we most associate with it, is the line highlight, and it's this highlight that we're going to be focusing on. For this technique, it's a great idea to have a brush you vibe with that you like to use, and I would keep it separate so it's always up for the task when needed. Again, we want to thin our paint and remove any excess on some paper towel first, which is going to stop those thick blobby lines. The first highlight we're going to do is called a chunky highlight, and for this we're using Corvus Black. This highlight wants to be quite a thick line, so we can still see it once we painted our finer highlights after this. Spend some time painting this highlight along any edges, as well as on any raised details and areas. And once you're finished, you should see how it's helped to bring out the shape and details of the armour. Our next highlight is called an edge highlight. I'm using Dawn Stone, and this is used on any edges and to continue bringing out any details. To make this easier, we can angle our brush against an edge and run it along that edge to create the highlight. For the areas we can't do this, then we just need to take our time painting thin lines where we want our highlights. For me, highlighting is one of the most important techniques to really practice and get good at, because not only does it help to improve the look of our miniatures, but it also helps to improve our brush control and hand-eye coordination, making us better miniature painters overall. Let's continue highlighting with a finer highlight using Administratum Grey. This highlight is used to emphasise any areas and edges we want to be more prominent and eye-catching. The last highlight we can do is a spot highlight, using white scar to paint little dots on all the corners of the armour where light would be more focused. And once you're done painting all of your highlights, you'll be able to see what a difference it's made to our miniature. When you're ready, we can highlight the gun casing, first doing our chunky highlight with Evil Sunz Scarlet. After the chunky highlight, it's time to use Troll Slayer Orange to highlight all those edges. Bring out those edges even more with a finer highlight using Fire Dragon Bright. Then finish the gun casing painting Taillight Ochre and all the corners for our spot highlight. We don't always have to do so many stages of highlights though. To highlight our Crozius handle and book, we can go straight to an edge highlight using Wild Rider Red, picking out some edges and corners with Fire Dragon Bright. I know highlighting seems like a really daunting task, but I believe it's a really achievable skill with enough time and practice, and we also need to be okay with not being very good at it to start with, and it's going to take time before we get really good at it. It's now time to finish our leather coat, continuing to create texture and interest. To create that cracked and scratched leather look, we're using Storm Vermin fur again to paint lots of scuffs and scratches, and we really want to take our time doing this and build up that texture slowly. When you're happy with how everything looks, let's highlight any edges with Carrick Stone, and we can again paint scuffs and scratches, and we don't need to do so many this time, and we can focus more around those edges. Now we're done with the leather coat, let's finish our belts and pouches, first doing a chunky highlight using Mournfang Brown. To highlight the edges we're using Baneblade Brown, and to finish let's paint a finer highlight to bring out edges even more with Carrick Stone. When it comes to painting our characters, it's always worth spending that extra time and effort helping them to stand out more against the rest of our collection. They're also a great way to practice the more fun and interesting techniques. Before we move on to the final section of the tutorial, let's finish our metallic details. To highlight our silver details we can use Stormhost Silver, and to finish our gold details let's use Canoptek Alloy. Our chaplain is pretty much finished, but there are still a couple of things we need to get done, which I'll show you how to do in the final section of the tutorial. In this final section of the tutorial, we're going to finish up all the other details, including how to get fancy with parchment. But before I forget, let's paint the pages of the book first with Morghast Bone, and then all we need to do is highlight the pages with Screaming Skull. I know what I've been showing you throughout this tutorial may seem a lot, and it is, but I really want to show you what's possible, and it's really up to you how much you actually do, and you should only ever do what you feel comfortable doing. It's time to get fancy with our parchment, and for this I want to talk about glazing, which is a great technique to help create smoother transitions between colours. Working from our Zandri Dust base colour, let's first use Baneblade Brown, and to make this a glaze we want to thin it down with twice the amount of water, making it more transparent. This is going to allow more of the colour underneath to come through, helping to create that smooth transition between colours. We're first glazing the ends of the parchment where we want to get darker, and when using a glaze we want to apply it in even thin layers. And so we can achieve a really nice smooth gradient, we can use a glaze of the colour we're working from. Now continue our gradient getting darker towards the ends with a Steel Legion drab glaze. Then after that we want to get lighter in the middle with a Ushabti Bone glaze, remembering to use a glaze of the colour underneath to help get a nicer transition. Let's finish any parchment highlighting these details with Screaming Skull. Then after you're done we can add interest, and rather than just having text, we can also use the transfers we get in the box with our miniature. Just apply these to your chosen area after using some water to release them from the backing sheet. Then to make it look more like they're printed or painted, we can use a small amount of microset which thins our transfers and sets them in place. And once it's done its thing, clean the area and we can thin down some Storm Shield varnish with an equal amount of water to protect the area and knock back that shininess. When you're ready to paint some actual text, we can use Rhinox Hide and paint little squiggly lines. And rotating your miniature and painting in a downwards motion makes painting these lines a lot easier. Then the last thing we need to do on our chaplain is to paint the eyes, first using Mephiston Red, and then all we need to do is paint a dot of Fire Dragon Bright in the centre. I always enjoy getting to paint a Space Marine character because they're a great way to practice and improve our skill with a brush. They're also a great excuse to do the more fun things and paint those cool effects and details. So let's see how he turned out. But before we see the reveal, I do want to take a moment to thank Dexter, Russ and Higara who have all recently become supporters to the channel. Thank you so much. And if you enjoy the content here on TableTopReady and want to help support the channel as well, you can become a channel member or join my Patreon, which not only helps me create this content, it also gives you access to our Discord, along with access to lots of other perks for as little as £2 a month. And for every tier you'll also get tutorials early and be kept up to date with what I'm up to behind the scenes. Our Space Marine Chaplain is now finished, and I hope I've been able to give you the confidence and knowledge to get your own painted. And I've also got plenty of other tutorials on the channel to help get you other Space Marine units painted, including some of the many chapters you may want to explore, so go check those out on the channel as well. I really do enjoy making these tutorials and I hope you find them useful. If you do, then please leave a like and let me know in the comments below. As well, make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on future content, and I'll see you in the next video.